And a huge thank you to our panelists and NHS for organizing both our last talk and this panel. We're so excited to dive into this topic of creating a world-class ecosystem for XR in the NHS. And NHS is one of our sponsors and partners. Big support. And so thank you so much. I'm going to just give it over to the panelists and let you start introducing yourself. Thank you.
Great. Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Sarah Tico, and I'm the co-founder of the XR Health Alliance, so I will be moderating this panel. I'm really delighted to have Nisa, Richard, Abison, and Dolly joining us. Just as a little bit of an introduction to our panel, so I'm a proud member of the XRSI's medical advisory group. So I've been working with Kavya and all of the team for some time here now. And I'm also have quite a few different roles, but I guess most relevantly the co-founder of the XR Health Alliance, which was formed earlier this year. So prior to this, I've been doing some work in the UK about how to bridge that gap between academia, healthcare, startups, artists and creatives, and think about ways that we can enable people to collaborate, fund that sort of work, but also create an environment where we can actually reach the people that are going to benefit from it the most. So we actually created a report between myself, my colleagues Foster O'Brien, who's previously with the NHS, and Fiona Kilkelly, who's a founder of Immerse UK. And we worked with a series of stakeholders, including XRSI, to create quite a comprehensive report that looked at some of the key applications of XR in healthcare from both a therapeutic and a training perspective. This includes anything from pain management to mental health, physiotherapy, clinical skills and training, and also patient education. XRSI helped us with the sort of safety and considerations, and we created a series of recommendations to the National Health Service about how we could start to create a united strategy for XR in healthcare, because we have this really wonderful system that enables healthcare to be accessible to people. Also think about how we can have a bit more joined up thinking, so that it's not companies running hospital to try and sell in, but actually think about something that really brings together that theory as well. So today we're going to talk about the work that all these incredible speakers have been doing so far, and have a little bit of a conversation about what's next as well. And we really invite you to participate in the conversation. I'm pretty sure that everyone here is obviously interested in the space at the very least, or probably quite active in it. And so I think as we are starting to build up what these plans look like, we really want to emphasize the need for collaboration. And I think for that, having spaces as beautiful and marvelous as this, to be able to gather together and think about how do we work together to create this is really exciting and important. So what we're going to do for the next hour or so, perhaps just a little bit under the hour now, is we're going to have our fabulous panelists introduce themselves, and then have a bit of a panel discussion, and then open up to conversations. And I think if you send them to Marco, if that's correct, then he'll pass them on to me, and then we can have a bit more of a chat towards the end. And so with that, I think we're going to start all the way from the other end and just do a round of introductions. Nisa, who are you? Where do you come from? What fabulous things do you do?
Thanks, Sarah. So hi everyone, I'm Nisa Manglaparathi. I'm one of the program delivery leads in the digital productivity team at NHS. So I'll explain a little bit more about what that is and what it does, but essentially extended reality technology is one of the technologies that I'm looking at as part of my portfolio. So for those that don't know, the UK's National Health Service, or the NHS, is a publicly funded healthcare service. So it was set up all the way back in, I think, late 1940s, and it pretty much leads the world in terms of the equity of access and making sure that people don't suffer the financial hardship when they're ill. So NHSX is a government unit that's made up of the National Health Service staff, but also UK government staff. And what we do is we support local health organisations to digitise their services, connect the systems through technology, and then transform the way that patient care is delivered. So as part of this, one of the technologies that we're exploring is extended reality. So we're looking at what potential it holds to improve patient outcomes, to improve staff experiences, reduce the cost of service delivery, and really enable those operational efficiencies and social impact. So I guess up until today, I've spoken to just over 100 NHS organisations, so hospitals, GP surgeries, community providers, so innovators, suppliers, academic institutes as well, really to try and understand at a high level what kind of research is going on in and around that XR space, what that technology market looks like, what it includes, and also what the system needs are. So what are the NHS needs that the solutions out there are trying to address and meet. So one of the early insights out of these conversations has been that actually there's so much that has been done already, particularly around testing these kinds of technologies, the feasibility, acceptability of it all. But there's a bulk of it that's actually sitting at the research stage. So I think if we're going to take XR seriously in the healthcare space, we really need to leverage the NHS as a platform, and how we use it as a rapid cycle kind of research and innovation platform, and begin to really build the evidence base for its use. So yeah, to kind of help us do this, we'll be looking to start discovery in the new year, try and understand more about the detail of what the potential of the technology is, how far we can take it, but also what the current landscape looks like across the world. So what can we learn from other countries and do here? How can we really evaluate the viability and value for money of the technology? So there's a lot of work to do ahead, but I'll stop there for now. So over to you, Sarah.
Oh, no, fabulous. Thank you. That was such a helpful overview. I think, yeah, doing some really brilliant work to be able to bring together all the research that's happening already. So I'm looking forward to diving into that a bit more later. Richard, please tell us all of the fabulous things that you're doing at Health Education England, and perhaps explain a little bit more about how HEE and NHSX might overlap. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. Good to be here, everyone. Nice to see you all. If you sat through and listened to my colleague, Dr. Neil Ralph, talking on the previous presentation, you'll know a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. But my name is Richard Price. I'm the Learning Technologies Advisor to the NHS, which means I get to work at an organisation called Health Education England, which is the organisation that's responsible for the care and delivery of all things to do with education and training of the workforce. So about 1.4 million people that we support through their educational journeys, all the way through from pre-16, when somebody's first starting to think about a career in healthcare, through to their undergraduate and postgraduate education until they enter the workforce as well, and all the way through to when somebody retires. So it's a huge undertaking, and like I say, I have the great privilege of being able to work with all of the people at those different stages of their careers and look at how technology can support them to enable them to be a better doctor, a better nurse, a better allied health professional, and all of the other professions in between. So the way we're doing that, obviously pre-pandemic, we were looking at sort of e-learning and things like that, but more recently, obviously looking at things like virtual and augmented reality to be able to deliver that. So we've invested really heavily in this technology. And I'm sure we'll talk about this later in the discussion, but we're obviously looking to see how we can use this technology to improve the way that we deliver that education. And I guess the big challenge for us has really been around clinical placement capacity. So to become a nurse or a doctor, you need to be able to do clinical placements in a clinical setting. That hasn't been possible due to the pandemic. So we've looked at alternative ways of doing that, and really things like HoloLens and things like HTC Vive and all of these other headsets have really enabled us to be able to deliver some of those clinical placements. So we've been starting to have conversations with NISA as well about how we can scale this up across the NHS as well. So it's a really exciting time, I think, to be working with this technology.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Richard. And Abison, you've been doing some really interesting work with Health Education England over the last few years. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do both clinically and the research you've been doing as an XR Digital Health Fellow as well?
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Sarah. So it's always a nice opportunity to share what I've been doing. Yeah, and as Sarah said, I'm primarily an eye surgeon by trade, so I work at Moorfields Eye Hospital in London. But that's a great hub of innovation in of itself. But I was lucky enough to join Health Education England as a Total Digital Health Fellow, which we'll discuss a bit later on. It's a new scheme to get healthcare professionals involved in the sort of digital health space. And I sort of just always had a general interest in digital health. I've got a master's in health informatics and I'm a fellow of the Faculty of Clinical Informatics as well. But in terms of my primary role at Health Education England, it was really to work alongside people like Richard and Sarah to construct a toolkit. And the aim of that toolkit was to help developers and educators effectively and safely implement XR tech in the context of healthcare training, but also as a foundational stepping stone to its use in therapeutics. And I'm pleased to say the toolkit is currently in its final stages of development, and we will be hoping to get that out to the public maybe in the next couple of months. And it's been a hard graft over the last couple of years. There's been a lot of interviews, research that's gone into this, and we think it's going to be a really important contribution to the sort of XR tech space, especially in healthcare. And the primary reason it was sort of brought into fruition was really that there's been multiple technology-driven approaches to implementing technologies in the healthcare space, from even from the advent of the radio to computers, and even in the simulation sector. But there were repeated failures in terms of horizon scanning and seeing sort of the future issues that would arise. So we've done our best to account for this in our toolkit. And the toolkit was based on sort of 6 primary areas, and we'll probably discuss this a bit later on, but essentially it was based on usability science, learning pedagogy, psychology, human-computer interaction. We brought on XR tech experts and simulation experts, and it's been a massive sort of mammoth effort by Health Education England, but we're hoping it will really help a lot of educators and developers effectively implement virtual reality, primarily in healthcare education and training, but also has a use in therapeutics.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Abison. And Dolly, you are a medical student at Leeds University that have been using XR in your training. Can you tell us more about that and the kind of things that you've been using so far and developing yourself?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Dolly. I'm one of the final year medical students currently studying in the University of Leeds. So basically, I was invited to be part of the panel because of my experience using mixed reality headset, namely the Microsoft HoloLens 2, to deliver anatomy teaching sessions to my fellow medical colleagues. So I carried out this project over the span of the past year. So we delivered a series of renal anatomy workshops, focusing on the clinical relevance to renal transplants. And the aim of my project was to evaluate how we can use MR and AR in medical education and how we can use that to improve medical and surgical teaching. So I think we can talk a bit more about that more in depth later, but essentially I'm just here to give you a medical student's perspective, how it's currently being used, how it can be used, and personal opinions on how we think we can use this in the future.
Fabulous. Yeah, well, should we start by diving into that a little bit more? Because the way that I've understood what's been developing so far is that Health Education England have been using it, XR, in a variety of contexts for quite a while, rather than what's been happening with the NHS or what myself and my colleagues noticed when we were setting up the report, is that there are a lot of sort of health therapeutic applications happening in the NHS, but they're very fragmented. There's the occasional hospice in one place or a hospital somewhere else. But actually, what's been seems to be happening with education and training is that there's been a bit more of a top-down approach, and that it's been used in a series of hospitals and training universities as well. So how did this start? Like, how long ago did you start Richard, like starting to distribute XR in healthcare training, and how long did it take from having this as like a small idea to actually having it as an embedded part of a student's learning experience?
Thanks, Sarah. So we started this journey about 5 years ago, probably, when we started buying this technology and started experimenting with it. And it was really early days then. There were big players in the market that were starting to come into space, like HTC, for example. Facebook had just released the sort of Oculus Go and things like that. So this was really in its infancy, a lot of this technology. We worked with amazing people like Nick Perez at Torbay Hospital, for example, who's been doing some incredible stuff with it in this space. Just exploring this from an educational point of view, because a lot of the work that you see in the XR space tends to be therapeutic space in healthcare. I know, Sarah, you do a lot of work in that space as well, with pain management and things like that. So we were really keen to explore how we could use this in an educational context. And I think we were, dare I say, dabbling with this prior to the pandemic. We were starting to get some good traction with this and people getting excited about it in organizations, but it was still quite a niche thing. It wasn't mainstream. But I think what's happened over the last 18 to 20 months with the pandemic is things have started to really accelerate. And like I say, we're now in this position where we're starting to buy thousands of these headsets. So we've got almost a library of these things that organizations within healthcare can rent out for a period of time, or sorry, not rent out, loan for a period of time on a free basis, so that they can borrow those, experiment with the technology, run specific projects, and meet specific educational needs around that. So we're really starting to scale that up now, and I think this is really exciting. We're on the cusp of hopefully getting one of these into every student's hands in the country.
And one of my first jobs was working in the NHS, in fact, doing referral management. And this was maybe like 10 years ago, and we were still using fax then. We do know that the NHS is often a little bit risk averse when it comes to technology and having a bit of an upgrade. So it's kind of phenomenal that this is already happening. And what sort of like work did you have to do to sort of measure that impact and create that case for investment? And how did that end up leading to the research that you, Abison, ended up doing as well? I don't know who wants to take that one, but interested to hear about how that investment came to be.
I'll let you feel with that one, Abison, if you wish.
Yeah, I think you're completely right, Sarah. One of the things that I guess we can take a sort of viewpoint from my experience at Moorfields was one of the issues that were arising were primarily information governance issues, and rightly so. You need to have the protections. That's the whole point of this safety initiative. But I think Moorfields was probably ahead of the curve slightly, because we were using a lot of extended reality, virtual reality simulators for surgical training. It's actually integrated into junior doctor training for ophthalmology. So we are probably better placed than others. But when it came to the implementation of any sort of digital health project, in particular stuff like telemedicine. I had colleagues who were talking about telemedicine almost 10, 15 years ago. The idea was often shot down for either, cybersecurity reasons, which are still, relevant reasons, but it was almost easier to dismiss any technological innovation than to invest the time and resources to ensure they could be effectively implemented. And one of the things that I often tell people I'm not sure if was it just me that got reset?
No, we're all back now, or still waiting for Sarah to come back.
Hi, everybody. It looks like the room got reset, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Marco's getting the slides reset, and we should be coming back here in just 1 second.
Hello, sorry. Seemed to have got booted out for a second. Sorry, guys. I think you were just halfway through explaining your immersive technologies framework, and then I kind of lost it all through a crashing headset. Did we get to...
I think it was across the board, Sarah. I think it was, I was booted out as well. So.
Oh, okay, cool. Glad we're all back. The joys of doing things in virtual reality, eh? So you've been developing this fabulous toolkit where you were, and now so you're releasing it. And could you perhaps just tell us a little bit more about how you're launching it, and perhaps what how you want it to be used and develop more in the future?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that was essentially the primary role of my fellowship in Health Education England. It was really born from the repeated failures arisen, I think I mentioned this in my introduction, of ineffective implementation of technology in the context of healthcare education and training. So in particular, this included a failure to adopt a learning-driven approach, but more of a technology-driven one. And I guess what we mean by that is, tools and technology will always just be aids to achieve an objective in healthcare. And I think the most common objectives we have in therapeutics is obviously to improve the quality of life of patients. And in healthcare education and training is to meet the learning needs of our future healthcare professionals. So when you take a learning-driven approach, you focus on the learning process and how the technology can aid one's learning. Whereas a technology-driven approach, which is often the approach that's adopted by a lot of companies or organizations, is, we've got this fancy new tech and we've got to find a use case for it, and it's almost working in reverse. So we're very conscientious of this and why technologies have failed in the past. And people have often struggled with poor business case development. There's often been redundancy in the system in terms of people duplicating resources. And as you mentioned, the failure for people to sort of collaborate and work as collectively. And more importantly, a failure to sort of horizon scan and look at future threats and opportunities. So we had all of this in mind when we developed our toolkit. And there's a lot of players in this sector, but I think if in our context of healthcare education and training, define the three main people being educators, developers, and associated parties, and the students. And how these interact is critical to effective development. So the aim of the toolkit was to provide educators and developers working in healthcare education and training with the necessary knowledge, skills, and tools to feel confident in the use of immersive technologies in their daily practice. And what we found is when we started developing the toolkit, and especially myself, when I was doing the interviews and trying to do the user testing, there was significant variability in users, educators' knowledge and comfortability with extended reality tech. And what I was concerned about was that there was a chance of excluding the very groups that were important to the development of the learning-driven approaches. And so I wanted to encompass this sort of variability in baseline knowledge. And in usability science is a classic way of trying to address this, and that's personas. And we basically created a toolkit which targeted three major groups of educators, healthcare professionals. And to make it sort of somewhat relatable, we used the sort of analogy of making a meal, and we divided our end users into three groups. And we divided them into three groups. One was a takeout customer, one was a meal kit customer, and one was a chef. And our takeout customer probably is reflective of probably the majority of people in the healthcare sector who want to use XR tech. And these are the kind of people who have a specific learning objective or even a therapeutic objective in mind, and they want to deliver this through an immersive learning experience. But however, they just don't feel particularly comfortable with the technology, and they have limited time to invest in the development process. So these kinds of people are looking for an off-the-shelf solution, but actually it can be quite daunting. There's so many solutions out there on the market, and how do you really know the difference between, what's high quality, what's, putting your users at risk? How do you evaluate all of this? So we've devised something called the Healthcare Immersive Technologies Framework, which is essentially a checklist. And if you're going to go and buy off-the-shelf healthcare solutions, you can just use this checklist to verify the quality and safety of the product. So it's a really easy fix for those people that are really looking for a quick solution to a problem. And then our second sort of end user group was what we call the meal kit customer. They're the sort of people who they're a bit more comfortable with immersive technology and extended reality tech, because they might have had experience in other technologies such as e-learning and virtual lectures, but they might not feel completely comfortable developing material in the space without guidance from experts. And so in combination with that checklist I mentioned earlier, we made these things called resource databases, and these have a lot of information which people can use to help guide their development. And this database is primarily divided into sort of 5 main categories, which we thought were critical to effective development of extended reality solutions in healthcare. And we divided them into 5 components. One was the learning assessment. So that's how do you effectively identify the learning needs of your students? And broadly speaking, in healthcare, they can be divided into declarative skills, which are sort of knowledge-based skills, procedural skills, and non-technical skills. And the second component was what we call the affordance assessment, which is what are the unique capabilities of these technologies that actually can enhance learning? And what's the impact on a cognitive level, on an emotional level? And when we talk about safety, I think we often think about mechanical, physical things, but we know that virtual reality, if implemented incorrectly, can have negative emotional responses. And what we want to do is avoid that. And how do we test and evaluate for those? And then there's the wider needs assessment, which is looking at, the more holistic approaches to things, so health and safety regulation, legal frameworks, the economic viability. So how do you go about assessing those tools? The fourth assessment is what we call a simulation assessment. So simulation and immersive tech go hand in hand. And so how can we learn from the simulation sector? Because you don't need to reinvent the wheel, because simulation has been around for a longer time, and Richard has a lot of experience in that. And what can we learn from that sector and apply it to immersive tech? And the final component is evaluation. Evaluation of outcomes is essential. It's probably the single most important part of the toolkit. So depending on your learning needs, depending on your therapeutic needs, how do you actually evaluate outcomes? And that's easier said than done, but we've tried to simplify that as much as possible. So we really want this toolkit to be as comprehensive as you want it to be. So if you don't have the time, there's a way of approaching the toolkit, but if you're more willing to invest the time and effort, then you've got a more comprehensive version as well. So it's involved a lot of collaboration, a lot of talking, a lot of research. We published some papers, so I'm happy for people to email me if they want to access some of those papers about the evidence bases. And we're very hopeful about the impact this toolkit can have. We're hoping for it to go live potentially in the next couple of months. It's off to the graphic designers at the moment to make it look very nice and presentable, and we should have something live going fairly soon.
So fascinating, and yeah, such an exciting and important piece of work, because I think it's been so fragmented for such a long time, understanding how can we show this value, but I think the deep dive that you've gone into about how can it actually be delivered, and also who's going to make it as well, because I think there can often be a bit of a misunderstanding of like, we're just going to teach doctors Unity and they're going to start making their own VR experiences, in a short period of time. But also, how do we empower people to have the understanding of the medium, the skills to develop it, and the right partners to do it with. But also, I think most importantly as well, that this isn't a tech-first solution. That it's not. We are obviously talking about XR, and that is the topic of the conversation. It is about how we solve those real-world problems, and that this is a unique and new emerging form of technology. We need to understand about how that fits into the existing infrastructure as well. And Dolly, I'm curious hearing a bit about some of the challenges and learning such an incredibly intense and challenging career path. What are the different types of XR applications that you've been using in your training, and how does that compare to perhaps previous methods that you'd used before and how it may have been easier in some senses or harder in others.
All right, so that's a great question, Sarah. So in terms of the applications that we've used so far, one of the applications that I like to focus on is the Hello Human application made by GigXR. So that was mainly the application that we use in our study to carry out the medical anatomy workshops. So Hello Human application is basically a software which uses immersive holograms to allow users to explore the 3D atlas of the human body. So it has over 11 different body systems. It has over 4,000 name structures with their descriptions on it. But what's interesting about this application is that it has the capability to create a collaborative learning environment. And this aspect of it is what drew us to using Hello Human for our study. So what we did throughout the year was we got one of a renal transplant consultant to work with us to create a renal anatomy teaching session and to relate its relevance to renal transplants. So this application allows, one of the main advantages of using this application is the fact that it's a 3D hologram and it depicts anatomy really well, and it allows you to see how it relates to other organs, other skin layers, and it's very interactive, it's very engaging as well. So it's not just something passive like you would see as for example, a lecture slide on a screen. So this is something that's 3D right in front of you. You can walk around it, you can remove layers, look inside the body, you can highlight them, you can even walk through it and see the structures inside the body. So it's really quite impressive.
Oh, brilliant, and so useful as well. I did a tour of Cedars-Sinai Hospital yesterday in their simulation center, and they had it was in the VR room, but they had a screen of a cadaver there, where again you could look at all those different layers. And something I hadn't been totally aware of is that there are a lot of faith-based hospitals in the US, and Cedars-Sinai is actually a Jewish hospital. They don't work with cadavers, which are obviously very difficult to get hold of often as well. And actually, through being able to simulate this, then there's obviously so much value in teaching. But what I also didn't know until that point is that actually, faith as well can have a huge impact on how medical education is delivered as well. And being able to access that anytime, anywhere, spatially sounds incredibly useful and super important as well. And Nisa, so you've been doing all this fabulous work about talking to hundreds of people. I had no idea you'd spoken to that many people. That's fascinating. And I'd be interested to hear a bit more about perhaps what you've learned through those conversations. I think specifically about whilst you're also thinking about what sort of hardware to invest in as well. Perhaps if you could speak to, some of the things you've learned through those conversations with people, but also how it's influencing your thoughts on next steps from a practical perspective.
Absolutely. So I guess sort of coming into this initially sort of around March, April time this year, what we were seeing was that actually, COVID brought about loads and loads of people across the NHS looking to different types of technology. And we saw things like online consultations, virtual wards, and so on. And then we started to see some of the, I guess, what we considered kind of the more novel or cutting edge type innovations as well. So we started seeing things like virtual reality being used for pulmonary rehab in north of England. And it was like, well, hold on, hang on. This has suddenly increased and accelerated the use of XR at a time where we didn't really expect it. And so what we thought was going to come sort of in 5 to 10 years time is actually happening now. We're starting to see, I guess, a transition from all the work that we've heard about happening in research institutes around precision surgery, around using it for collaboration across the globe, what other industries are doing using this types of technology, whether it's assisted reality, whether it's virtual, augmented, or mixed. There are specific use cases for all of these. And I guess the challenge for us is around trying to understand from an NHS perspective, where do we see each one lying? And also that's the current picture. What is that picture going to look like in a couple of years' time? What's it going to look like in 5 years' time? And how much can we prepare for the change that's going to come? And I think one of the other areas that it's really highlighted is just how much work is going on at a research level, and how much we need to actually think about how do we bridge that gap, how do we work with academic institutes and research institutes to start bringing in some of the innovations and work that they're testing into the NHS, so that it's not just about a feasibility kind of assessment. How do we turn it into something that's looking at its efficacy? How can we actually start embedding some of this technology into the way that we are actually delivering care within the NHS as well?
Absolutely. And I guess we can't be at XR Safety Week without talking about XR safety. I guess this is an open and big question for everybody, which is that, you know, as part of this, we do have to consider cybersecurity, psychological safety. There's a whole sort of, you know, huge piece of work that needs to be done around standardization and regulation. And how do we start with that, and how does that relate to other things like DTAC? In fact, yeah, Lisa, would you be open to perhaps explaining a little bit about DTAC and the kind of work that we may need to do when thinking about XR safety?
Yeah, sure. So I think this is something else that's sort of come up through conversations that I've had with sort of lots of different organisations and people, which is really around the need to develop the infrastructure. It's all very well saying, right, this is a great piece of tech, we can use it in this way, but actually there needs to be that infrastructure built around it to really help embed it in healthcare in the longer term. So what we're looking at is trying to understand, what does that current picture look like? So what are the current policies, the current legislation, the regulation and standards, and how do we make those fit for purpose for XR? There's also other things which have come up, I'm sure, earlier on in this week around the ethical risks, particularly if we're looking at bridging that gap between research and embedding it within the NHS as well. But then also the things that come with technology, like data and privacy, cybersecurity, and then from a healthcare perspective, the clinical safety side as well. So NHSX is only about 2 years old, but you know, in its infancy, I guess one of the things that it really kicked off is accelerating that technology acceleration during that COVID response. And one of the things that has come out of that is this digital technology assurance criteria that's been developed. And what that looks to do is it looks to bring together all the criteria that are needed from an NHS organisation perspective to say to then assure the technology that organisation is looking to buy or purchase or use. So it's available on the NHSX website at the moment, and I really encourage you know, innovators and suppliers to go and take a look, because it provides a really good outline of the types of things that the organisation looks for when they're looking to purchase and use a technology within the healthcare space. But obviously there's a grey zone. There's a grey zone with extended reality and what it can do and what it can offer. And I think we've got some work to do in terms of working with our partners across government and other regulatory bodies to think about how do we add in the flexibility needed for how XR is going to evolve, but also how do we use it today? How do we make sure that XR is going to be used safely and effectively, and making sure that there are clear standards and compliance, not just for the people buying the technology, but also the suppliers and innovators who are creating and supplying that technology as well.
Yeah, and we need to do this together. It's so complex, and there's so many different applications across AR, VR, MR, therapeutic, training, patient education, how we work with hardware and software companies and games developers. So there's no way that we can do this in an isolated way. I think what I'm really excited about is the sheer faith and interest from all these different partners, from NHSX, from Health Education England, the fact that students are getting embedded and involved in it from an early stage, and also we've got UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, that are part of Innovate UK, which is a sort of government funding initiative that supports innovation, and they've also been getting involved. So we're kind of creating a sort of holy trinity of organisations coming together where we can think about how it connects, who do we work with, and what happens next. And so I think it's a really interesting time where we're gathering together to consider this more. We initially were told we had an hour for this. I was like, that's so much time to fill. We've only got 5 minutes left, and so I feel like there's more we could talk about. We could talk about this for weeks, I'm sure, but I want to make sure that we've got a moment for questions from the audience. So does anybody have any? Thumbs up, I guess, and then maybe we can do a little bit of yeah, being able to project across the room. Anyone have any questions for us? Speak now. Oh, I see one in the corner. Paul, please share with the group.
Give me 1 second, I'll get you unmuted.
Are we projecting Paul, or is there a way we can project Paul?
Well, thank you. I just got unmuted. Thank you.
Great.
My question is, what resources do you think is available for those who want to come to NHS from outside the country? The last month, the United Kingdom government was recruiting medical personnel from Kenya, for example, where I'm from, and we don't know what resources the system can be used to recruit or to orientate people who are interested to work in the NHS. Thank you.
Just to make sure I've understood, so is like companies that want to sell the products in the NHS, or individuals that are doctors that want to work in the NHS?
Sorry, I had muted myself again. Yes, the United Kingdom government was recruiting doctors to work in the NHS. And my question is related to that. This resource, this XR resource, which I feel can be used to orientate or even be able to recruit personnel who are interested to work in the NHS.
Oh, I see.
Mhm.
Lisa, is that something that you're particularly involved in, or that you think could be explored?
Just so I've understood that right, is the question the use of XR to recruit internationally?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Mhm.
I think you've touched on a really interesting point there around that remote collaboration.
Or to orientate, not just to recruit, but to even provide orientation for the personnel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's absolutely a tool that can be used for that. And we've seen it used for very different but similar scenarios. So, for example, during COVID, I think there was a site, there was Imperial, who used equipment. They used the HoloLens to actually do virtual ward rounds. That meant that actually they saved a lot of money in terms of reducing that need for PPE, but actually were still able to educate and train their patients and their staff from wherever they were located, but it was always off-site. So in terms of orientation, I think absolutely it not only applies to staff that are looking to work in future in the NHS, but also patients and the education side of things. So helping them to almost wayfind around the environment that they'll enter, working to reduce those anxieties as well. So I think there's sort of lots of applications linked to that question that you've just asked.
Absolutely. And I think also,
if I could just jump in there. So
Correct.
this is something we've got a couple of sites within the NHS that we're actually using this right now. So using Google Glass, for example, to be able to give tours of a hospital before people even fly into the UK. So we know this is being actively used. Salford, for example, Salford Hospital are using this quite extensively as part of their international recruitment. So there are some really good precedents around that.
And for medical students as well that want to have access to environments that perhaps they couldn't get access to, usually things like pathology labs that you'd have to only a limited number of people can get into, and being able to show people what that's like is so valuable as part of that experience. So, I'm aware it's already past, and we've hardly scratched the surface. I think we'll have to wrap up there because there's more exciting events going on. So I want to thank everybody on the panel. Thank you so much for joining us today. Nisa, Richard, Abison, Dolly, you're doing such important and exciting work, and really, really thrilled to be in your presence and continue working with you. Please do follow them all online on Twitter and all the other places as well. Thank you so much to XRSI for arranging today, and we really hope that we can continue to have conversations with you all. If you want to hear about the work that we are doing with this sort of national strategy for XR in healthcare, then you can also follow the XR Health Alliance. So at Twitter, that's at XRHA with 2 underscores. And you can read our fully interactive online report that also has now a downloadable PDF by popular demand. So that's xrhealthuk.org. And do please reach out. We really want to work with the community to think about how we can not just do this in the UK and realise the world is bigger than that. And I think we need to build this together and think about how this relates internationally to create a more collaborative ecosystem to make people's world a little bit of a better place. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Kavya, for having us. Over to you,
Thank you so much. And if I'm going to borrow just one additional moment from the panel. I want to thank all the panelists, and specifically, I want to thank Health Education England, NHS, for sponsoring this entire track and even helping us to thoughtfully curate, along with the track chairs, what the agenda should be, how we should be thinking about safety, because sometimes when we talk about safety, it's very, it's a dry topic. We can be very alarmist, but here we see so many opportunities at the forefront, which is why safety, instead of like, we must do safety first. So I love that approach, and thanks for advising all through these years. Most important piece is, imagine an entity as risk adverse as NHS or UK and English people in general, but reaching out across the Atlantic to solicit consultation from various American entities. And then we saw a very amazing display of collaboration throughout the years, but specifically this week, as well as at Augmented World Expo, to bringing in FDA, MDIC, like organizations from across the world. But I am just amazed at the way Health Education England is really leading the way, really get in front of all these challenges. And I love that. And I'm so thankful that we can dive into data issues and ownership issues. And Abison, personal thanks to you for that toolkit that you created. And, money is all great, but the most important aspect of our work is sharing knowledge and research. So because you share that knowledge and research, we are, obviously working on shared responsibility models for immersive educators. It's just so fantastic. So I thought that was something that I wanted to call out. But just in the end, this is just the beginning of our journey together. So I want to thank you and invite everybody else to join in with HEE, NHS, and all the stakeholders that Sarah called out. And let's begin.